Remembering God's grace. When we face various crises in our lives, we must not forget how God has cared for us in the past. Here's Dr. Gene Getz.
Isn't it easy to forget? Well, this principle actually comes from the apostle's response after he had miraculously fed 4,000 men, besides women and children. Remember, he fed 5,000, then later 4,000. And when we look at the same miracle recorded by Matthew, we focused on another principle. Again, to compare the miracle, same miracle by Matthew, another principle. And I called that reaching Gentiles. And here's the principle. We are to proclaim the message that Jesus Christ came to be the Savior for all people, regardless of race, color, or creed. Now, the context for that, if you have your Life Essential Study Bible in Matthew, you'll see a blue line. And in that section, that blue line is a repetition of Matthew. So I didn't repeat that part. There's a principle there. But basically, if you follow that blue line, you'll find that it describes Jesus going into the region of Tyre and Sidon, which is Gentile territory. And when he comes down back into Israel, back into the Holy Land, he doesn't go on the Jewish side to the west. He goes on the Gentile side to the east, which is called the Decapolis, the 10 cities. So we know he's moving into Gentile territory. Now that leads us, you see, to another principle in relationship to the Gentiles, in relationship to this particular situation. He went on and he fed these 4,000, very similar to what he did when he fed the 5,000, again, beside the women and the children. And it's interesting, by the way, if you compare those two miracles, when he fed the 5,000, which included others, they picked up 12 baskets. They started, with these little fish and the little pancakes almost is what they really were as far as bread is concerned. But when he fed the 4,000 and others, it says they picked up 7 large baskets. Not small baskets, large baskets. And I think there's a reason Mark recorded that, because it relates to the Gentiles and what Jesus is not only doing for the Gentiles, but what he is teaching his men. And so that, you see, takes us on then into this powerful lesson that we have in Mark 8:16 through 17. They were discussing among themselves that they did not have any bread. Now they're in the boat. And aware of this, he said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact you have no bread?" Now remember what has just happened. He had fed the 4,000 plus, and they had 7 large baskets left over. A great miracle. And by the way, I don't know why they didn't have some of that bread in the boat. I don't know what happened to that bread. But Jesus went on to say, aware of this, he said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact you have no bread? Don't you understand or comprehend? Do you have hardened hearts?" So you have to put this event in correlation with this other event, which gives us another principle in relationship to this miracle as it relates to the Gentiles. And so he teaches this powerful lesson. Verse 18, do you have eyes and not see? What just happened, man? Do you have ears and not hear? Didn't you hear what happened back there when I told you to deliver all that bread and I multiplied it? And do you not remember? That must have been a rather tense situation. They're in that boat. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of leftovers did you collect? Sheepishly, they must have said 12. they told him. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you collect? I would hope their heads were hanging lower as they responded, 7. And he said to them, don't you understand yet what I've done? And that leads, you see, to this principle, remembering God's grace. When we face various crises in our lives, we must not forget how God has cared for us in the past. Now, this is a huge illustration, a very dynamic illustration that we'll never experience in our lifetime. But isn't it amazing that these disciples forgot? They thought Jesus was addressing them because they forgot to bring bread. What he was addressing was that he had worked this miracle and they had forgotten. They had forgotten. And it's easy to forget, isn't it? God's grace. And so here's the question for reflection response. What are some practical things we can do to help us remember God's past blessings in our lives, especially when these special blessings relate to present crises? And one of the suggestions I have is keep a diary. Record what God does in your life, the little things. We tend to forget them, the big things. We tend to forget them. I know I do. Especially when I'm under stress, especially when it's uncomfortable. It's easy to forget what God did in the past. And I find that if I have a record of some of these things, it just helps to review it, to go back. And I remember sitting down one time when I was pretty distressed in a particular situation, and I happened to be overseas and felt a lot of pressure. And I just felt like Satan was attacking me, which I think he probably was. And I remember getting up in the middle of the night and sitting down and recording everything that God had done for me in the past, from the time that God saved me in terms of ministry, in terms of God's work in the churches and the things that we did. I just had to sit down there and record it all to help me remember that in this crisis where I felt like Satan was attacking me, that God had never let me down in the past, even in the midst of some very difficult situations. So let's keep journals. And this will help us to remember the things that God does for us in the past. And as I was thinking about this reminds me of that old gospel song. You remember it? Count your many blessings. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. And one other thought, and that is that in our prayers, let's remember to be thankful and to give praise for the things God has done. That's a great place to start in prayer before we begin asking Him to do things for us. So here's this principle. Let me just mention it one more time. When we face various crises in our lives, we must not forget how God has cared for us in the past.